The Civil Rights Movement is a required unit of study in the New York State curriculum for the U.S. History, Government, and Geography regions. Starting in 1909 with the creation of the NAACP, which stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, this organization was created to help blacks achieve equality. This was followed very closely thereafter by the creation of an urban league, and then in the 1920s by the beginning of a cultural movement called the Harlem Renaissance. This is a group of artists and writers, one of which is Langston Hughes, who celebrated being black and being an American. Thereafter, in the 1930s, a number of organizations started to become created, and one of them was the Black Muslims. Begun by Elijah Muhammad in Chicago, this was an opportunity for blacks to embrace the Islamic faith. In the 1940s, CORE was created, the Congress on Racial Equality. Its key emphasis was to try to desegregate the armed forces. Unfortunately, this was not accomplished until after World War II ended, when Harry Truman signed into law a desegregation bill. Ben Davis then became the first black general in American history. In the 1950s, the Supreme Court decision, Brown versus Topeka, ended segregation in public schools. Specifically, this 1954 decision by the Warren Court, mentioned as part of a class action suit by a number of families who believed they were being discriminated against, featured Linda Brown, a young black American who, by her own opinion, was being discriminated against by having to march many, many, many miles to school when a white public school was literally only a few blocks from her home. The Supreme Court, in a monumental decision, decided that segregation is inherently unequal and that integration was something that must happen immediately in the United States. Her famous lawyer, Thurgood Marshall, certainly became famous due to his involvement in this case and later went on to become the first black Supreme Court justice appointed by President Johnson while he was in office. Closely thereafter, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference was formed by Martin Luther King, and the students who wanted to participate formed their own organization called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, known as SNCC. Later in the 1960s, the Black Panthers would also become involved in this movement. Specifically, in 1966, Huey Newton and Eldred Cleaver decided to form the Black Panther organization. This organization was dedicated to attempting to get blacks more recognition in the court systems and also to fight against police brutality. They had a number of programs involving feeding breakfasts to students who lived in very impoverished communities. Part of their program also was about the right to bear arms. They believed that they should have the right to carry guns because guns were so frequently used against them. Huey Newton had studied law and was quite eloquent in defending his Second Amendment rights. Unfortunately for this organization, they did become involved in many acts of violence, ending up having some of their major representatives, such as Huey Newton, shot, and in some cases, as in the example of Fred Hampton, killed. This organization came to a violent end by the end of the 1960s. All of the major Black Panthers were either dead or in jail. Probably the key figure in the 1960s, besides Martin Luther King, was Malcolm X. Malcolm X actually was assassinated in 1965 because of his views. He had been given a territory in Harlem by Elijah Muhammad as an attempt to recruit blacks into the Black Muslim faith. He died for his cause, therefore making him a martyr. This is just a brief overview of the civil rights movement, which was probably at its peak by the late 1960s.